for some reason, right, as I'm growing my EQ and growing my emotional health and intelligence and stuff, I was trying to maybe exert control over my emotions so that I wouldn't feel big emotions, because I had a story in my head that, you know, if you do feel big emotions, then I've got a low EQ. And she's like, no, dude, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you know, life is filled with a spectrum of experiences, and some of those life experiences are super intense for anybody. For the most intelligent, most emotionally intelligent people, life still has a wide spectrum of emotions. In fact, the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more you allow yourself to acknowledge, identify, process, and manage those the spectrum, the full spectrum of emotions. EQ gangsters. So just getting out of my therapy, my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it was awesome as always. So super thankful. And I want to share a couple insights, self-awareness insights. One is from somebody told me, a friend of ours gave me a great insight, and then one was from my own. So let me tell you hers first. She told me that just because you have strong emotions, it does not mean you have a low EQ. And I thought, okay, I got to chew on that a little bit. Just because you have strong emotions or big emotions does not equal a low EQ. It's what you do with those big emotions. How do you manage and process, how do you acknowledge, identify, process, and manage those big emotions? And that may not be a big lightning bolt for anybody but me. For some reason, right, as I'm growing my EQ and growing my emotional health and intelligence and stuff, I was trying to maybe exert control over my emotions so that I wouldn't feel big emotions, because I had a story in my head that, you know, if you do feel big emotions, then I've got a low EQ. And she's like, no, dude, that's not necessarily the case. I mean, you know, life is filled with a spectrum of experiences, and some of those life experiences are super intense for anybody. For the most intelligent, most emotionally intelligent people, life still has a wide spectrum of emotions. In fact, the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more you allow yourself to acknowledge, identify, process, and manage those the spectrum, the full spectrum of emotions. I've got one leader that I'm working with. I won't go into any details, but based on his upbringing, he was only allowed to exhibit and display no emotions. So for his entire childhood. So guess what that looks like as an adult? That looks like an adult who has no, or I say no, he has little connection to or with his own emotions and the emotions of others. Because again, they have been unallowed for his whole childhood. So big emotions does not mean low EQ. It's what do we do with those big emotions? Do we stuff and avoid them like I have for 4 decades? Okay, well, that's not emotionally healthy. That's also not a sign of emotional intelligence. That's a sign of a lack, because I want to stuff and avoid. I don't want to feel. I don't want to feel the spectrum. I only want to feel, happiness and, and joy, right? Because I had toxic positivity, so I didn't want to feel any. I didn't want to feel any emotions and stuff. So So I can relate with that guy a little bit, not from the same, the outcome was the same, but how we got to that spot in our lives is different. So that's the first insight. The second insight, coming out of my jiu-jitsu class, and if you guys are watching on YouTube, I always have a post jiu-jitsu beard fro. So you can see it is legit beard fro. And our professor, who's a 4th degree, maybe he's even a 5th degree by now. I don't remember. He's got a lot of stripes. He's like echelons above where I'm at. So he's almost at every single class, just because this is a whole nother, I don't want to get too far on a tangent, but he is passionate about teaching. He loves it. He loves jiu-jitsu. And it's just neat to see when somebody enjoys something so much that he shows up to class, not because he has to, because he's got a truckload of upper belts that are great instructors. He just loves it. He just loves teaching. So he was at class today, like normal days, and we had this. It was a smoke fest today. We did a handful of stretches, and then after stretches, we went right into what's called up, down, and outs. So, and again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, because I'm sure most of you probably don't do jiu-jitsu, but there's someone that starts on their back, there's someone that starts standing up, and then you roll and try to sweep the guy that's standing up, or this guy that's standing up tries to make, pass the person on the bottom's what's called a guard, and then the person on the top, once that round is over, the person that's standing goes to his back, the person on his back goes to the end of the line, and then it's up, down, and out, up, down, and out. And it is a smoke fest. And we did it for probably, it felt like 30 minutes, maybe, yeah, it felt like 30, 40 minutes. And then we did our normal rolls, which is all, so anyway, it was awesome. Great class today. Here's the point. My insight is there was probably 20 of us, plus or minus, and it's a bunch of animals. No joke. Everyone is beast mode. And so there's no easy roll. There's no like, oh man, I can't wait to get a break rolling with this guy or rolling with this lady. Everyone is a machine and is an animal. So we started in this position. The person on the bottom started in this position called X guard. It's called X guard. Totally can't explain it, just on the podcast, but just bear with me. And it's the person that's standing has to, again, get out of the person on the bottom's X guard and try to pass and get into a dominant position. Well, there were a couple times where, and I don't remember if I was on top or bottom, and maybe both, but there were 2 different times where Professor happened to be walking by my station when I was drilling with, when I was rolling with my training partner. And evidently, the 2 times that he happened to walk by, I happened to get a good move, right? I happened to either do a sweep on my opponent or pass my opponent's guard. And Professor, who does, he does not throw out like compliments or praises like just because you showed up to class, right? It's it is, if you did a move well and he compliments you, that's it's a big deal, you know what I mean? Because he doesn't normally just pass out compliments for kicks and giggles. Well, anyway, I say all that to say it made me feel good. And then after it made me feel good, it made me feel bad because it made me feel good. I was like, Noble, and I think what happened was it made me feel like it was like a little bit taste in my mouth of people pleasing, and which I am repulsed by nowadays, because I was a people pleaser addict for so long in my life, and so I want nothing to do with any of those remaining, after effects of people pleasing. And then I thought, well, is that wrong? Or again, is that a sign of a low EQ because he complimented me a couple times and it made me feel good? Does the fact that his compliments made me feel good mean that I have a low EQ? Because again, I immediately felt I was kind of, embarrassed, upset, ashamed, disappointed that I felt good by his couple compliments. And then I thought, well, so I'm externally processing. I don't think it's a bad thing to feel good when somebody compliments you. Now, here's where I guess I know that I'm growing is that, or that I'm continuing to grow, is that like it also doesn't define me. Whereas before, and I've told you guys this many times, and I think maybe even the last episode or within the last couple episodes, before praise, because I took everything personally as my own identity, I would take praise as if it were my identity, and equally, I would take hatred and criticism as if it were my identity. And so, because of my people-pleasing addiction, and which are both a terrible way to live. I don't want to take praise or criticism as my identity. It shouldn't be. And so I was able to kind of externally process, recognize, it did make me feel good when professor, gave me a couple kudos for a couple moves that I did, but I also didn't take it personally. I didn't take the praise personally, like, oh my gosh, that means I'm the greatest jiu-jitsu guy of all time, which, is obviously not the case. So I think I was able to take it from a more emotionally healthy perspective and acknowledge the kudos and like accept it, like, okay, hey, thanks, professor. And it was in the middle of the roll, so it's not like you don't stop and say, hey, thanks, professor. But I could in my head, like, okay, I accept it, I receive it, and I appreciate it, and I value it, and it's good feedback for me right in my jiu-jitsu journey. But it doesn't have to define me. It doesn't have to I don't have to marinate on it for the next 3 weeks or whatever. So anyway, that was just another insight for me today, that things that what makes us feel good, what makes us feel bad, and why, I guess, is maybe some other questions to ask. Because I guess there could be some circumstances where, sin, right? Sin in some cases feels great. It feels great when I eat a pint of Ben & Jerry's. But does that, does that mean that it feels good in the moment? But does that mean that that's good? Well, no, that doesn't mean that that's good. So just because, and this is where obviously I conflict, there's a lot of areas where I conflict with society and culture, but that's one major area. Just because something feels good doesn't mean that it is good. Feelings change all the time. The goal of emotional intelligence isn't so we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and bathe in essential oils and smoke Skittle farts. It's to be a better human being, as Alex Gill would say, who's in the EQ Mafia and wrote the book Identity. He said, man, EQ, the journey of emotional healing and emotional health and emotional growth and emotional intelligence is becoming a better human being. And in my space, it's being a better, not the social media platform, by the way. That's a blast from the past. But it's leadership, right? It's being a more effective leader when you are a more emotionally healthy, emotionally intelligent leader, human being. And so that's the goal, right? To be informed by our emotions, not to be controlled by our emotions. It's just data. Emotions are just data. It's just information. So rather than where I used to run from my emotions, now I'm trying to get more comfortable with my pleasant and unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions. I want to learn how to roll, like jujitsu analogy. I want to learn how to roll with each one of my emotions, pleasant and unpleasant. I want to be able to roll with my white belt emotions, because those are easier for me to deal with. But I also, so that would be my example of my pleasant emotions. But I also want to be comfortable rolling with my unpleasant emotions, which in jiu-jitsu analogy would be the upper belts, right? Because they're not easy to roll with. And so, but now because I've been rolling with, all the belt levels for so long, or I would say so long, for 5 years, now I'm fine rolling with whoever. I'm fine rolling with a black belt. I rolled with a black belt today. I'm fine rolling with a white belt. I'm fine rolling with I'm fine rolling with a 270-pound black belt, who's gonna, crush me. But I'm comfortable now rolling with anybody. I want to do the same thing with my emotions. I want to feel comfortable rolling with any and all of my spectrum of emotions so that I can be more a well-informed human being, leader, husband, father, friend, etc., etc. Another analogy that I've been using a lot in my coaching sessions with the leaders that I'm working with, the executives and stuff, is it's learning how to surf. So it's not running away from a particular emotional wave, it's learning how to surf the wave. So we're not, again, what are we supposed to learn from that particular emotional wave? Maybe we're supposed to learn something from that anxiety, from that sadness, from that frustration, from that depression, from that disappointment, from that discouragement. Maybe we're supposed to learn something. Well, if our automatic response, like me, is to always run away from those unpleasant emotions, we'll never learn the lessons that we're supposed to learn, and those lessons will continue to repeat because unaddressed emotions don't get better over time, they actually compound. Unaddressed emotions don't get better over time, they actually compound. So learning how to surf instead of running away from the wave, so now you can learn how to surf that wave of sadness, that wave of disappointment, that wave of anxiety, that wave of stress, that wave of. But then once you've surfed a little bit, you've learned some lessons, you've asked yourself some questions. Okay, what am I supposed to learn? God, what are you trying to teach me right now? Well, how can I grow from this? Once you do that, now let me surf off the wave and let me surf on another wave. Because you've learned not only the self-awareness, but the self-management of how to surf the wave, each of those particular emotional waves. So hopefully a couple helpful insights. Thank you so much for, again, being a part of the journey. So thankful for each and every one of you. If this has added value, it would sure mean a ton, if you wouldn't mind taking 30 seconds to just leave a review, a rating and a review. If you would subscribe, share an episode that has really impacted you and really maybe encouraged you and empowered you. If you don't deal with your emotional issues, your friends, family, colleagues, and coworkers will be forced to. If you don't deal with your emotional issues, your friends, family, colleagues, and coworkers will be forced to. What happened in your childhood was not your fault, but it is your responsibility to learn, heal, and grow from. What happened to you in your childhood is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to learn, grow, and heal from.